Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Ometeotola. Welcome, folks. This is Jerry Teo with the Healing Generations podcast, part of the National Compadres Network and Brotherhood of Elders collaboration. And I want to welcome you today to this podcast today in which we, focus on the healing of our communities, the healing of ourselves, the healing of generations, and the healing of future generations as well, as we attempt to lift up the medicine and the teachings that we've learned from ancestors and from our present-day life, but at the same time, to heal the wounds that have come from, generations of racism and oppression and the many inequities that have come. And we thank you for joining us today. We're on this journey really as a continuation of what our ancestors have done for many, many years, the warriors, the revolutionaries, the grandmas, the big mamas, the homies, all those that have, really just strived to find that sacredness in each other, but the sacredness in the life that we live. And so I want to, as we do that, invite you to just to be present with us. And as we do that, we acknowledge the ancestors. I want to acknowledge all of our ancestors, all of your ancestors, and bring them in the room, bring them in the space. And we acknowledge them for who they are and what they've done. And we recognize that many of them struggled to even survive, to share the teachings, to preserve the traditions, the ways we give thanks for all those ancestors and invite them to join us and guide us today. But in that path, we also recognize that there's a residual of trauma and struggle that are part of this journey for us, part of our legacy and part of what we need to do, the work we need to do. So we make a commitment to do that work. And for that reason, we invite folks that are on that journey, that are doing that work, that are committed to really that struggle that way. And as we do that, we recognize that we sit on indigenous land. We sit on the land of our indigenous relatives. I want to acknowledge, the Tagma Gabrielino people of land where I sit. And as you take a deep breath, I ask you to acknowledge the land of the original people where you sit. But also now acknowledge the neighborhood, the barrio, the hood where you live, and the gatekeepers, those OGs, the people that really control in a good way the spirit and the vitality of that community, as you also acknowledge your own family and yourself as well. And we thank you for joining us today. And as part of this journey, we invite folks that really are in the struggle, they're in the teaching, in the journey, and have chosen really to bring the medicine that way in the best way they can. And today, I feel very happy, very joyful to invite someone that I consider, a relative. I consider him a nephew, but also he's a leader. He's a wisdom keeper. He's a warrior, a father, right? He really enjoys in being a father, and hears so many stories about his sons that way. But he's a great mentor, uncle to many, right? But an advocate. He also, from the other side is, professor of Rasa Studies and Education at San Francisco State University. And, many, many accolades along the way. Has written books. He has a recent book I'll ask him to talk about as well, But he's acknowledged as one of the thought leaders, one of the forefronts of those that are advocating for transformational education, healing, wellness for our students and our families and communities. And who I'm talking about is Brother Jeff Duncan-Andrade. So, Jeff, welcome. Thank you so much, brother, for being willing. I know you just came back from Chicago. You're traveling, doing all your work and everything, but thank you for being willing to spend the time with us this morning. And let me just turn it over to you and allow you to welcome the listeners.
Gracias, Tio. It's an honor to be invited into this space and to share palabra with you and the community that taps into all of your wisdom and teachings. I know that there's just not very many people in my life that have had such a profound impact on me as a human being. And I just really appreciate all of the medicine that you've given me over the years, and was humbled to be invited to have some conversation with you today. It was great to meet your son. Yeah, I guess I would just start by acknowledging that I am in my home on the 3400 block of East Oakland. So grateful to the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone people, for allowing me to live in this space and to try to bring up my sons in a good way in our community. And also want to, acknowledge my mother, Ara Graciela, who's now 94 years old, and just so much wisdom. And, the older we get together, she and I, the more I realize that the teachings really haven't changed. that a lot of the same things she's saying to me now at 51, I'm 51, are things that she was teaching me, as long as I can remember the teachings. And so I'm really grateful to her. I'm the youngest of her 7 children, 2 of whom have crossed over already to the ancestors. And then just also want to acknowledge my pops, William Jackson, who taught us in a very different way. He was a very quiet man, but a really powerful warrior spirit. And he passed many years ago in a really terrible car accident that I think was true to the way that he would join the ancestors. He beat cancer, multiple heart attacks, had a medical death sentence from doctors that were doing experimental surgery on him, and just wouldn't go. And then he left this world going to serve. He got called to serve somebody who was dying. And he did a lot of hospice work in his free time. And so he was called to go sit with somebody who was going to join the ancestors. And on his way to go do that work, he was hit head on by a truck and killed right in front of my mother, right in front of our house. And I tell that story right now, I think, just because there was a lot of teachings for me there too. In the way he lived his life and the way that he transferred over to the ancestors. And so I want to acknowledge him as well. And yeah, I'll leave it there. And thank you again for creating some space for us to share palabra.
Yeah. Well, definitely thankful to your mother and father, man, for all they put into you and along that journey as well. And just acknowledge those teachings right there. And as we begin to talk about that, I want to invite you to share a little bit about your journey, about, your people and where you come from and that journey, because I think that this society tries to take that from us, doesn't want to see that, doesn't want to acknowledge it. In fact, when we'll talk about education and schooling, and really tries to separate us from that, make us disconnected from that. And so we always want to start with that in terms of the journey and the lessons and the teachings, along that way. But talk a little bit just about you, Jeff, and where you come from and your journey and to where you're at now.
Sure. So, like I said, I'm the youngest of 7 kids, and I acknowledge my mother and father. My mother's grew up on the border in Sonora at a time when the border wasn't the way that people understand it now, right?
Right.
So she grew up in a place called Nogales, which at the time was kind of like a bimodal city in that there was Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Sonora. And so she was an only child. My abuelito, who I never met either of my abuelitos. There's a sort of history in our family of men not living long, and then young men growing up without that kind of male elder guidance, at least not from our, quote unquote, blood relatives. So anyway, my mom grew up there in a very different time and sort of had a normed biculturalism that, as she started then transitioning to schooling in the US, was, it was Arizona in the 1930s, which is probably not all that different from Arizona in 2023.
Right.
And so her biculturalism and bilingualism, as somebody who was, literally crossing the border every day,
Right.
was ripped from her, and she was punished for speaking her native language. And I think that, that very much carried over into how she thought about how she needed to raise us.
Mm-hmm.
And it has probably a lot to do with why my name is Jeff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because she didn't have ethnic studies, and she was being, taught in a very specific way in schools that was very harmful to herself and her identity and her family and her community. And there was a sort of ongoing and continuing present day narrative about, but that's your opportunity, right? Little brown girl, right? It's worth it to trade that in at the door so that you'll be accepted. And so, since as I've gotten older and learned more and more about ethnic studies, I respect the decisions that she made to the degree that, like, I understand them, and I understand them at a very intellectual level, at a social cultural level, but also at a very personal level now that I have my own sons. And I think my mother thought by naming us in that way that she was protecting us.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is that created a whole layer of complexity that she never could have predicted, right? And layers of trauma for us in really understanding and embracing who we were, because we would be at home with my mom and her mother, who lived with us until her death, and had one very clear, cultural way of being, a very kind of Mexicana, Chicano, right, experience. And then we would go to school, and we were not allowed to bring any of that medicine in. And it was seen as a problem, right, when we did. And I was one of the ones that just refused to not be who I was. And so that created a lot of problems for me. And I had some older brothers and sisters that were in the streets and bringing a lot of that home. And so, I was born in LA. My mom migrated to LA when her dad died. She dropped out of high school. Her dad died when she was, I think, a junior in high school. And so her and my abuelita moved to be with my mom's cousin in LA. So then we got roots in South Central. My mom then lived not far from USC, the USC campus in South Central. And so that ends up being where I was born. But my pops, he's the youngest of 11 kids. And he was growing up in Florida. And so you can imagine the kind of teachings he was getting, right, in the 30s in Florida. So I think I get a lot of my warrior and kind of anti-institutional, anti-status quo sensibilities from him. He was a junior or senior in high school, and he had this teacher that he really didn't like, and he was really violent towards my dad. And so my dad decided he was going to kill him. And so my dad made a bomb. And as we've talked more about this story before he passed, he's like, I just wanted to do something.
Yeah.
Because I just felt so powerless. So he makes this little nitroglycerin bomb, sticks it on his teacher's seat. The teacher sits on it, and it, basically it was a firecracker. But so it goes off, and my dad, being 16 years old, freaks out, thinks he killed him, runs away, and hides under the school. And I never met his dad, but the stories were that he was a very mean-spirited person. And I think some of my dad's gentility comes from not wanting to repeat that.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to go home and tell him. So he hid under the school to figure out what he's going to do. And it turns out the teacher was fine, but my dad doesn't know. So my dad hatches this plan that he's going to join the military, and then no one will know, right? He'll just escape. So he gets up in the morning, he goes to the Marine Corps recruiting whatever station, and he does all the paperwork, signs up. And, this is a very different time, right? When they just, if you had a pulse and a,
take
you take you. So he signs up, and then, he's all done. And then he's like, he looks at the recruiter. He's like, okay, like, I'm ready. And the guy's like, what do you mean? And he's like, I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to go. And he's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, well, you'll have a recruiting class and then we'll come get you. And my dad's like, no, I need to go right now. And guy's like, that's not how it works. So he's like, damn. So he realized he has to go home, face the music, tells my abuelito what happened. And then he, whatever happens there happens. But my dad is like, so I did this other thing because I thought that I was going to be in big trouble. And so he's like, can you come with me so I can withdraw my, and his dad was like, no, he's like, you have to go. You made a commitment. Now you have to go. So my pops drops out of high school and goes in the Marine Corps. And he ends up getting stationed in Long Beach. And that's how he meets my mom. And, 7 kids later, we start moving around a lot because some of my older brothers and sisters are in the streets and bringing a lot of that stuff home. So we moved from LA to Sac. I live in Sacramento for a while. I start school in Sacramento, and then same stuff starts happening in Sacramento. So we were sort of like this, we are on this migration pattern up the I-5. Things got really bad for my family in Sacramento, like really, really bad. And there was a really kind of turning moment where my sister almost kills my mother. Her boyfriend at the time runs my mother over with the car and drags her down the street. And this happened in front of me and my brother. We were like in the front yard, sitting on our big wheels, just watching our mom get dragged down the street. So we leave again, basically in the middle of the night, keep going as far north as we can get on the I-5. And we end up in this, what at the time was one of the poorest counties in the United States, a place called Douglas County in Oregon. And we run out of money. And so that's basically where we stop. So I spent several years there. And so I tell this story because it's really shaped and colored how I understand poverty in this country, the multiple layers of it, how I understand how the institution of school operates inside of that context, the things that it norms, the things that it teaches, and then how different communities respond to that and how they shape, how their identities are shaped in those two contexts. And then my sort of way of dealing with a lot of this was that I got very active in the streets, but I was also a really good athlete. And so I kind of had this double life where, when the sun would go down, I was doing things that were really harmful to me and to my community, but I was also celebrated because I could run fast and jump high. And I became very skilled at negotiating and navigating school. And I became like a master cheater at school. That was what really interested me, was how many ways I could like break the system and not get caught. And so, I would study the way that just to figure this out, right? I would just study the way school worked, the flow, the time, the adults. And I got really good at it, good enough that I could keep playing ball. So fast forward, I end up getting some athletic scholarship offers, and that really became my identity, was as an athlete. And because I was a mixed race kid, I think that I ended up really connecting most deeply with Black youth and the Black community, because inside of that community, it wasn't about whether or not I was enough of this or enough of that, right? And we had this common cultural connection where when we would step between the lines, what really mattered was like what you could do as a teammate. And the rules were known. I mean, when we were outside the lines, people were changing the rules on us all the time.
Yeah.
But when you got between the lines and you put on your uniform or your practice gear, whatever, like everybody knew the rules. And you didn't debate them, right? It was just like, and they couldn't change them on you. I mean, they could, but it was like everybody knew like what you just did was wrong. And you couldn't use your power to like tell us otherwise. And it didn't matter how much money you had. It didn't matter who your parents were. It didn't matter who you knew. We would whoop your ass. And that was a place where I think all of the kind of best parts of my identity were allowed to thrive. And so I invested so heavily in that and never really moved away from being connected to the streets and those things. But I always knew that this is where I'm supposed to be. And that then created a set of opportunities for me and a different relationship to school. That's how I knew colleges was because I would watch ESPN because I was so into sports, and I would learn about all these colleges from sports. And so I tell this story a lot of times that when I was a senior and, thinking about colleges and had to meet with this counselor and this was the time when they would have you take this thing called the ASVAB. Do you remember the ASVAB?
Yeah.
The Armed Services, Vocational, whatever, right? So I took the ASVAB and I was, and then it was supposed to pop out like, this is what you're supposed to be, right? And I was supposed to be like a mechanic or something. And then, you had to meet with like the ASVAB counselor to talk about like, your vocational journey. I mean, this is everybody coming out of my high school was like going into a vocation, right? If they were graduating. And I told the counselor, I said, I want to go to Georgetown. And then he was like, why do you want to go to Georgetown? And I was like, cause there's a lot of people of color there and a really good basketball team. And at the time, this is when John Thompson was coaching Georgetown, right? And their hoop team was all black, right? And had a very strong like black identity. And he slides me the Georgetown pamphlet, and it's all these white kids, right? Because Georgetown is like a super elite white college, right? And I'm like, no, not that Georgetown, the Hoyas. And he's like, yeah, that's them. And I was like, no way. And that was like my first real awakening to the fact that my relationship to college and like that university track was so shaped by my relationship to sports. And that I didn't really know what college was. And so I ended up accepting a scholarship to Berkeley. And so that brought me to Oakland. And one of the things that I said, because I had to move around so much as a kid, one of the promises I had made to myself was that once I get control over my own life, I'm not going to move. And so I came here when I was 17, and I'm 51 now, never left.
Wow.
And it was, when I went to Berkeley, and I'll share one more key moment that I think really shaped me being here right now. It became really clear to me very quickly that I was not quote unquote Berkeley material. I remember when I walked into my dorm room. So I was in a dorm with like a lot of the athletes and then a lot of these like, they called them legacy kids. So these were kids who like second, third, fourth, fifth generation Berkeley, right? And so my roommates, so I was in a triple, and my roommates, one of them at the time, a perfect score on the SAT was 1,600. And one of them was this like presidential blah, blah, blah fellowship kid. And he scored a 1590 on the SAT.
Wow.
Missed one question. And then the other kid, my other roommate, scored a 1580, and his dad was the vice president of General Mills.
Whoa.
This is how they introduced themselves. They introduced themselves to me on their SAT score. And I cheated to pass the SAT to qualify for NCAA. I failed it 4 times. And my 5th time, I figured out a way to cheat it, and I passed. And so like my first stepping into Berkeley, I was like, whoa, like, where am I?
Yeah.
And so it became really apparent to me that I was out of my depths, or at least I thought I was. And then I got hurt in preseason training, like really badly, tore all the ligaments in my ankle. And that was it for me, because that was my whole identity.
Yeah.
And so I got withdrawal papers, and I was gonna leave. And there was another, the person who was in charge of our floor was this Black man who was in Berkeley's law school. And he always used to look out for me. Like he knew what was up. And he used to like go for walks with me and talk to me. And he knew I was going to leave. And he said, before you go, I want you to go talk to Harry Edwards. And I didn't know who he was. This was, pre-Google. But I trusted this big homie. And so I went to see Dr. Harry Edwards when I was 18 at that time. And if you don't know who Harry Edwards is, the listeners don't know who he is, like, you should look him up. Like his work is profound. And Brother Edwards is like, I don't know, 6'4", 6'5", built like a starting linebacker in the NFL. And his voice is so deep. We used to record his lectures with those old tape recorders where you can change the speed.
Right.
And his voice was so deep that we used to put it on like the mousy speed, and he would sound normal. He was like 2 octaves lower than James Earl Jones.
Whoa. And
he was just this mountain of a man, and he would wear these glasses that would tint indoors. You remember those?
Yeah.
And so it always looked like he had dark glasses on. And he brought me into his office. I'd never met him. And he sits me down, he closes the door, and he talks to me for about almost 2 hours. And he knew me. Like, he talked to me like he knew me. And he did. Like, I was a stereotype. And he knew what I thought. He knew how I was feeling. He knew I wanted to leave. And in essence, what he said to me was that you're a rose of a different color. And now you're in a rose garden. And you're trying to be something you're not. And you're never going to be them. You're never going to be the child of the vice president of General Mills. You're never going to be, someone who was prepared in those elite schools that they were prepared in. You're not. And so the more you try to do that, the more lost you'll be, and the more you'll feel like you don't belong here. But if you can use all the training that you got to survive the streets and to be an elite level athlete, and apply that to the way that you study, then you'll eventually catch them. And if you stay with that kind of work ethic, they'll never catch up to you, because you can read everything they've read, but they can never have your life. So they can read about how you live. They can put all those lessons that you learned because of how you grew up. They can never have that. But you can have everything they have. So I left that meeting with Dr. Edwards, and I literally wept. Like, I was on crutches, and I like crutched my way all the way back to the dorms, crying, because I felt like it was the first time anybody ever told me the truth about school and about why I felt the way I felt.
Yeah.
And I did. I went home. I got all my uniforms, my sweats, everything. And I poured lighter fluid on them in the parking lot, and I burned them. And I went the next day. I got 2 jobs in the library, and I just studied. Every break I had, I would sneak up into the stacks in the library and just randomly pull books, and I would just read, just random shit. Just because that was the discipline I learned as an athlete. Like, you just keep working, keep working, just keep working. And that changed my relationship to education, right? Like, and Angela Valenzuela talks about the difference between schooling and education.
Right.
And it was at that moment that I really began to understand what it meant for me to study. And that took me into ethnic studies. That took me into wanting like know more about myself, right? Where my family was from, who the Opata people were, which is where, my mom's lineage is. And then that ultimately leads me to wanting to be in spaces with young people to share the teachings that I got so they get them earlier. So that when they get to, if they choose that path, that they're ahead of where I was when I got there.
Yeah. Jeff, thank you for sharing all of that, because it really gives context to the work that we're doing, that you're doing right now. But I really want to lift up, what people don't understand, the impact of that sense of acknowledgement and acceptance. And when you don't get that, and even talking to your mom was faced with, how do I raise my kids, so that they don't suffer, I'm sure, what she went through. Your dad living in Florida, we know Florida now, man, it's crazy, right? I mean, in terms of them trying to take away who we are, and your dad having to navigate that. So you have two parents that are struggling just to navigate their own sense of identity, and then trying to figure out, how do I raise these kids where they don't get hurt and diminished and oppressed the way that I was. And as a parent, and you're a dad too, you have to figure out these things, and you don't want to compromise. But the worst thing is for your kids to be hurt, for your kids' spirit to be broken, for your kids to feel diminished. And sometimes we as parents then have to make these decisions, that we don't want to make. And I saw in my own family where, my parents speaking Spanish and telling us speak English.
Right.
You speaking. And so as we, the younger of us kids then got less instruction in Spanish and less instruction. And in fact, my dad, who was Tapilan, Coahuitecan, and Mexicano, wouldn't even say either. He said, I'm a Texan, right? Because he was born in Texas. He didn't even say Mexican. We're Texans. And not understanding the struggle of a country and a place and a world that doesn't even see you and acknowledge you for who you are. Now we layer on that, you mentioned mixed race. We layer on the complexity then of that in a world that doesn't know how to honor all people, and how to bring in grandmas from different places and say your identity in your totality matters. And so, I really appreciate you sharing, because it first of all, it resonates with so much of what I felt, but what a blessing to have Dr. Edwards and others that came along your path that saw you, and that saw that richness of your, not only your intellect, but your spirit and your warriorness. And what I appreciate about you, Jeff, is you have all of those, right? And I know because we have a relationship. I know that sometimes all of those different aspects, they struggle with each other. The intellect with the warrior, with the homie, with the, all of those things in this society still doesn't want to see you, struggles to maintain and to do, your sacred work. So I appreciate you, for bringing all of that. And I'm, wondering that now, as you reflect back on that journey, what were those major lessons, and what were those, you talked about the struggles, but what were those major lessons that you've learned along the way, or the struggles that really propelled you to really do the amazing work that you're doing today?
Well, I mean, so many lessons, and yes, so many people, so many teachers. So when you were reflecting and summarizing, reacting to what I just shared, I was thinking about how for like my whole life, I would literally get asked this question like weekly. People would be like, what are you? And, I went through all these phases about like how I would try to answer that question. Right. And, that question has really defined, I think, so much of my life. And the lesson for me there over the years, I think that I've sort of put the different pieces together, is that that's so much of what I see in young people, is this search for an answer to that question, right? For meaning, and this belief that there actually is an answer, right? Like that you can find it and lock it in and write it down. And I think one of the core lessons that I learned from all those experiences that I try to share with young people and that I try to share with educators is that the project of schooling people, particularly in this nation, is an effort to sanitize and to, as Cornel West says, to duck, dodge, and deny the truth that has put us in this situation that we find ourselves in as a nation. And schools are the core and primary engine for shaping and norming that truth dodging, ducking, and denying, and the sanitizing of those truths. And, you know, if you look at the research on how young people in this country actually spend their time, a lot of people don't put the pieces together, that they think that the families are shaping kids and the neighborhood or the barrio is shaping kids, or now it's like social media and, you know, YouTube and video games. But if you actually look at the data, the single biggest influence on young people is school. They spend more time in that institution between the ages of 5 and 17 to 18 than they do with their family, than they do with their community, than they do with church, than they do in front of screens. And we're pointing the finger at all these different directions while largely leaving school unquestioned, unchallenged, and unchanged. And what I often say to young people and educators that have emerged from the teachings that I've received is that the meaning is in the mess. And if you resent the mess, then you'll never find the meaning. And I think that so much of my life, like, I resented how messy things were. And why can't my life just be easy? Like, why do people have to treat me this way? Why does my house have to be fucked up? You know, why does my sister have to be strung out? Why do, you know, why do cops always have to fuck with us? You know, and when I started thinking about those things differently, those whys differently, and how they connected to the question that people kept asking me, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? I began to understand that the mess, and this is what I think Edwards, the path he really put me on, was that the messiness was the gift. And all that shit I had to go through growing up was the gift that allowed me to be around young people in my community that were going through similar mess, and to be able to look at them. Like, I remember I had this teacher that told me, you're not like your older brothers and sisters. You're different, and you're going to be able to get out of here. And I both stopped trusting that teacher at that point, and I really resented them because it made me realize, like, you don't really know who I am. Right? I'm no different than my older brothers and sisters. I just see this for what it is. And I'm going to manipulate this, which makes you think that I'm different and somehow I have more value than them. When in fact, like, I was on the streets when the sun went down, just like they were, but my teachers were never around. And so, you know, there's a brother that's been really influential for me that, his name's Patrick Kamanyan. He's a longtime teacher from LA and Oakland, taught with me for many years in Oakland, and is now a professor at University of San Francisco. And I was studying his teaching, and I asked him, why? Why do you teach like this? And he said, I wanted to be the teacher that I never had. And that's how I felt. I didn't have the language for it until he said that. And I think the biggest lesson I learned was that all those things that happened to me happened to me because there was a kid, and I can name them. I can name students that was on a collision course with me. They weren't even born yet, you know, and I was 15 going through some shit. And I was going through that because Creator had already put me on a collision course with this kid.
Right.
And 35 years later, bam, I smash into that kid. And I can see them, and I can hear them, and I can feel them. And when they're sharing with me, they know I see them. They know I feel them. They know I hear them.
Yeah.
Because like you just know, like when you're looking at somebody and you're really talking about what you're going through, there's a way of knowing that I think our ancestors have passed along to us. That there's people who like they care about you and they want to see your life get better, but it's from this very kind of paternalistic savior, like the pobrecito, right?
Right.
And then there's people like Edwards who like they're not feeling sorry for you. They're trying to get you to understand, no,
yes,
bro, like this, you're lucky.
Yeah.
Can you see it? Can you see the meaning? And for me, like that is one of the most profound lessons I've been given is, can I find the strength and the teachings inside of myself to see the pain and the woundedness as a gift?
Wow. That's deep, brother. And I think that as you're describing that transformation, you taking the mess and creating a message, of medicine, of healing, of transformation, and recognizing that part of your journey and part of the, if you will, your preparation was going through all of those things. And I think that what we don't realize is that when people say, well, who are you? What are you? They're asking the wrong question. And it's the question they want to ask because they want to pigeonhole you or control you or stigmatize you or lock you up or whatever. But the true question that comes from our people is, of whose are you?
Yeah.
Right? Of whose are you? And when we can get to that question of whose are you, recognizing that we come from ancestors and people that have teachings and have medicine that have prepared us, regardless of how society would say your parents did in raising you, they prepared you, right? They prepared you for this journey. And we often even criticize parents for not being, connected or not raising kids right. But they did the preparation that they could, right? And it then falls on those systems, if you will, school and all the other systems, to then recognize, and if you will, the gifts, to recognize the journey, to recognize even the mess, not as something as a deficit, but as part of the soil that we have to plant in and water and grow and cultivate, right? And that's what I see, first of all, you described it beautifully, how that happened in you, but that's the work that you do. And I feel you, brother, because so many times, I've seen not just young people, but other people too, that I can feel them. I mean, they don't even have to describe. Now, man, I know where you're at. And damn, it's triggering the hell out of me because I remember, and it's not like I remember I remember yesterday when somebody still, even though I have these degrees and credentials, still they front me up that way and still question me and still want to know who I am. And it's not really who I am. They want to know, they want to continue to oppress me and make me think that my knowledge and the wisdom and the teachings of my ancestors are not valid so they can control me, right? And I know that's the struggle and that's the battle, but that's the medicine that you carry and that's the work that you do. And I just want to appreciate, you for that. And that transformation is not easy because it's a daily thing.
Yeah.
Because we get confronted daily. Now at a different level. Now you're in a university setting. Now at a conference last week talking with other peers and, peers at different places, some that have, that have joined, the system and joined the systemic way of looking at it. And then others that are trying to find it. So, talk to us a little bit about, the sacred work that you're doing and that you've dedicated your life to, because out of all of that have come, you who really have guided the way in terms of we call, transformational learning, community wellness. We've worked on things around wellness for young people and that index and all of that in schools. Talk to us about the sacred work that you're doing that, really was catapulted from that journey.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm reminded of one of the most important teachings that you gave me many years ago that I find myself quoting you back to people all the time, including in this session we just had in Chicago. You said to me once, wounded children speak the most truth, and we resent them for it.
Mm.
And, I just had to say this, when we were in that session, it was a huge room, right? Because there was a lot of people that really wanted to hear from all those folks on the panel.
Right.
Where we were sitting, there was a wall behind us that opened up. So it was like, it was our room and then another room, and then they could split it in half. But if you open it up, it was like the biggest room in the conference, right?
Right.
For the big keynote. So when we were speaking and I was acknowledging you and a couple of the other big homies who weren't able to come, the session in the room next door, it was a gathering of Western indigenous peoples presenting their medicine. And they started drumming and singing, like literally right when I was talking about you. And so I just stopped and I got a little emotional and said, oh, he's here. And then everybody was just kind of like, damn, so anyway, you asked what is the sacred work that we're doing right now. And I think part of it is that. Part of the sacred work that we're doing is slowing down and acknowledging the sacredness of ourselves and our relationships. And so, people often talk to me about, they'll say my work, right? And I don't even know what that means, because I've always worked collaboratively. Before team teaching was a thing, I used to team teach, before sitting in circle in classrooms, right, it's always been a thing in our communities, right? But that's just what we did.
Right.
And it was always us, and it was always we, and it was always our. And so I always feel a little uncomfortable talking about my work, right?
Yeah.
Because I've never thought of it that way. And so, what we've been working on is, one, being more intentional about acknowledging that and not getting sucked into the accolades and the, who does this and who does that and who created this and who created that. And and I understand also the importance of that because of the ways in which our work gets co-opted and leveraged for people that aren't really committed to the work, right? But to do it because they know that they can get contracts for it or whatever, right? And that shit really bothers me. But I guess to say what we are really focused on right now, I would have to talk a little bit about what we were focused on. And so this will go back to when I first went back to grad school. And I'd been teaching and coaching for a long time in Oakland. And I honestly, I didn't want to go to, I didn't want to. But we were out on a teacher strike. At the time, it was the longest strike in the history of California, teacher strike in the history of California. It's since been outlasted. But we were out a long ass time. And we would be out on the street, and me and Ernest Morel, we would still have class. So our students, instead of crossing the strike line and going in, they would just, and we would still assign them reading, and they would come and talk to us, and they would come and turn in papers. And it was a trip because our colleagues, almost all white, would get pissed off at us. Right. What, you stopped being a teacher? You think our young people stopped needing to have these conversations and learn and read? Because no, this is solidarity with what it means to be a teacher in this community. So anyway, Ernest, while we were out there, he's like, yo, man, we need to go back to grad school because we have some answers for the things that so many people are struggling with in school. But we need those credentials to get access to that boardroom to have these conversations. And I was like, fuck that, man. I am not. And the irony was I'm like, fuck that. I'm not going back to school, but I'm going to school every day because I'm a teacher. Right. So he's like, bro, just apply. It's it doesn't cost you anything. And this is when they still had waivers.
Right.
So I applied, and we ended up going to Berkeley together, and we would teach every day. And then tutor our kids at lunch. We had half-time positions. We would teach every day for half the day, tutor our kids at lunch, and then we would drive to Berkeley, take our grad classes, and then drive back to the high school, coach the varsity basketball team, run these what we called study table, take a lot of our kids to dinner, because by the time we were done with study table, it was like 8 o'clock at night, drop them off at school, go home, lesson plan, grade papers, try to do our readings for grad school, try to write our papers, get up in the morning, do it all over again. And we did that for 6 years. And at the time, one of the like most popular texts that was shaping conversations about transforming schools was a book called Savage Inequalities by Jonathan Kozol. And he's a journalist who would like taught for maybe a year or something in very voyeuristic, right, way. And his whole narrative was about the dysfunction of schools. And that used to piss me off because I felt like all these people were building these careers, these academic careers, research careers, basically documenting how jacked up schools were and had no solutions. So it was like this really intensive voyeurism that was going on in educational research. And so we went in saying, no, there's actually people with answers. Inside of all that toxicity, there's people who are actually meeting the needs of kids and families. And why aren't we studying them? Why aren't we understanding them? So that really shaped how I thought about connecting my experience as a community member, my experience as a teacher, and these skills I was developing as a researcher. And Ernest and I were like the first people to bring our students to AERA, the largest educational research conference in the world. Now it's normed because we were like, we don't do research by ourselves. Right. We do research in collaboration and in solidarity with our community. And everything that we're learning, we have a responsibility to share those tools with our community. Like we're not letting them stay at Berkeley. Right. Those are our tools. Like we're the original researchers. And we have concocted this image of ourselves that researchers live in the ivory tower. Like that's where research is done. Right. And so for many years, that was the research that I was doing, very much in the field of education. And then I just kept finding that it was like circular, like the same conversations, right? And no solutions. No. So I was introduced to a film series from PBS called Unnatural Causes. And they were talking about the same things we were talking about, but they were using the lens of like public health and social epidemiology and neuroscience and physiology and like all these, Western medicines that, as, one of my colleagues and former students, her name's Tiffany Marie, she said to me once, she's like, Jeff, it's funny because now Western medicine and Western science is saying the same things that our elders and ancestors have been saying for generations. But because it's Western science saying it, suddenly it's true. Right. And I'm like, yeah, and dope. So like, take your pick. Like you can listen to the elders, or if you need some like hard science, cool. Because actually the science is the same thing. And it was really that moment when I saw a bridge for the way in which I'm talking about the work between the training I had received in ethics studies, the training I had received in like critical sociology, the training I had received as a researcher, and the things that I really cared about. Like I didn't care about college going rates. I didn't care about GPA. I mean, I did sure, but they weren't my focus. Right. And I knew like I could produce those things and that would give me more like credibility and leverage to do it in the way we were doing it. But for me, that wasn't ever the end game, right? It was that I wanted to make sure that when young people left us, that they loved themselves more than when they crossed our paths. Wow. That was it. That was the focus. And so when we picked books, when we picked poetry to read, when we picked projects to do, it was always about that. Like you're going to understand yourself and your ancestors and your community better. And you're going to understand it in a way that helps you understand just how powerful you are and just how much medicine you have.
Wow.
And that's going to put armor on you, because I can't change what's going to happen when you walk out of here. And I know you're going to get attacked. And so I have a responsibility to armor you up for those attacks. So that really changed the way in which we were talking about the work, to say, and this was right when schools started talking about being trauma informed.
Right.
So there was this window for us to push and talk about things, but we tried really hard to get out ahead of that and say, no, it's not about being trauma informed.
Mm-hmm.
It's about being well.
Yeah.
And that's the medicine. And so in the kind of traditions that you started laying down for us, right? The groundwork that you started laying down for us, where you were mixing medicines, right? You were taking the best of Western science, right? And that kind of clinical training, and mixing that medicine with the training of the elders, the training of the ancestors, and creating even more powerful medicine. And so that really became the focus, was what would it mean to create a classroom practice where that was the metric?
Yeah.
How well are the children that spend time with us, and how much more well are they for having spent time with us? And what is it about the way we are teaching, the way that we are connecting with young people and families, that creates that medicine? Because we didn't know. We had like ideas about it, of course, like instincts, but we started using the tools of research to talk to our students and families to understand, what is it about this that is most meaningful for you? How is this different than what you experience in second period, third period, fourth period? And we wanted to understand it metacognitively, right? At a much deeper level, because people would come from all over the place to sit in on our classes. And then what they would want was our syllabus.
Right.
Just, okay, like, can I have your curriculum? And it's like, no, you can't, right?
Yeah.
It's not how it actually works, right? Do
Right.
you really want to understand? So we realized we had to start writing about this and talking about it to deepen people's understanding, not about what we were doing, but about why we were doing what we were doing and how we were doing
Right.
what we were doing, and why young people said that was so meaningful to them.
I really want to reinforce what you shared in there, though, in terms of really intentionally focusing on young people loving themselves and honoring and accepting them, because that's where we started. We started with your struggle in terms of who are you and how society made you feel like you were not whole, that you were not enough, that you were deficient, and I think, that's the crux of the wound in this society. Mm-hmm. That, there's a hierarchy of value, there's this oppression, this racism, this identity struggle. So why wouldn't that not be a centering place for guiding and raising and developing young people? The sense of accepting, acknowledging their sacredness, acknowledging who they are, but also recognizing if you don't do that, then you harm them. It physiologically begins to make them not well. And your work, therefore, begins to center, young people's wellness, wholeness, acknowledgement, sacredness as the part of that journey, as a part of the learning, as part of the trajectory. And I know that through all of that, there's so much more we could talk about in reference to this. And, you collectively with a whole bunch of people have developed a wellness index. And now, we are working on some amazing work to see if we could transform schools into centers of that. And I know you've written a book as well. And I'd like, I know you wouldn't lift this up if I didn't mention it, but I want you to lift your book up, and I want you to mention your book, because I want the listeners really to have the opportunity to be able to get to a deeper sense, because, a podcast is not long enough to really encompass all of this. But I want to ask you to mention your book, but also, as we transition and close this out, to mention what is the counsel and advice you'd give to people out there that are really working with young people, that are responsible for the young people's lives. What advice, counsel, wisdom would you give them that you found really necessary in terms of really embracing young people on their path?
Well, thank you for mentioning the book. Yeah, I think on that journey that I was just, describing, there was a really critical moment where I began to transition my thinking from what I could do inside of the classroom. Because what I was seeing and what I was knowing was that we have lots of really good examples of what it looks like in an individual classroom, what it looks like even in a program, right? Or sometimes even at like a whole grade level. But what we don't have is good examples of what it looks like across an entire institution. And you go into any school and like you can ask the young people, they know where the medicine is, right? Oh, it's in, her class or his class, right? And they're like, what about that class? No, hell no, right? So they know both where the medicine is, right? And where the pain is, right? And where the torture is. And I think that we have a lot of really good research and examples about what it looks like in individual classrooms or spaces. And I think that work needs to continue, and that's really important. But then I went to New Zealand and spent time with the Māori, and that changed me. And I always encourage educators that are wanting to do this work to go spend time with the Māori, because there's a lesson there from them, because they were in a place not unlike where we're at in the 70s, where, and maybe even like at greater peril, where there was talk of total language loss, and a group of Māori elders pinned down because there was like real effort inside of the Māori community to preserve language and culture and to build it. And they were losing ground while working their asses off, right? Passing all these initiatives. And when they kind of zoomed out a little bit to piece together, why are we still losing ground? What dawned on them was that all the work that we're doing is with adults. And we're sending our children into this British model of schooling. And then they pop out and they're these adults, and then they have kids, and then we're trying to, and they're just learning their language. They're just learning their cultura. They're just learning their medicine. And then they're sending their kids back to lose it all.
Right.
And so they made this decision, Tamaiti and a whole group of Māori elders made this decision that they had to reclaim the education of their babies. And they literally did federal time for opening the first Māori school because the government prosecuted them for sedition. But they did it, and they started something that the government couldn't reel back in. And so now if you go to New Zealand, there's Māori schools all over the country that are reflective of the ancestral and historical Māori values and practices. And when I saw that, seeing is believing.
Yeah.
I couldn't unsee it. And so I was like, like the indigenous people of this land did this inside of a colonial context. So that shifted me to thinking about what would it look like? Like, why are we asking permission? Why are we asking permission, one, to be self-determining about the education of our own babies?
Yeah.
Right? And two, we come from builders. Like, our legacy is not to like tweak institutions, right? Our legacy is to build.
Right.
So that led us to launching the Roses and Concrete Community School, right? An effort to actually try to take those teachings from the Māori and then apply them in Deep East Oakland. And so we did that, right? And then we got attacked because the political climate shifted to the political climate that authorized that school. And it was like, yes, like that is what we need. Political climate shifts. And then when we come up for renewal, they're like, where's your test scores? And we said, wait a minute, like, look at our charter. We said, right, that was not the focus of our school. And what that forced us to deal with, specifically me and Allison Titiango-Cubalas, because she was on the board of the school, was a realization that data was the coin of the realm.
Yeah.
And that we had our own kind of data that was profound and undeniable, but we hadn't figured out how to present that data in a way that spoke back to power.
Right, right.
And that's what led us to launch the Youth Wellness Project,
Mm-hmm.
because we said, we know this is measurable. And we had a lot of conversations about, do we really want to measure this? And I think part of that was our own hangups with our understanding about measurement and not understanding that our people have always measured things.
That's right. We have.
Right? And so that led us to launching this, multi-year project, which you were involved in, and so many of the people that have really influenced our thinking were involved in, to create the Youth Wellness Index, which is now like a validated metric. And that has then led us to this next project that we're talking about to say, okay, now we have to go test it. We have to go test in a whole school to see what would it actually take for a school to repurpose itself, and to say that the purpose of this project every day with these young people and these families is that they will be more well at the end of the day than they were when their families handed them off to us in the morning.
Wow.
And everything that we're going to do, our reading, our math, our science, the design of the school day, what we feed them, who we hire, how we organize the hallways, right? All of it is going to reflect that purpose. And everything else is ancillary. Yes, we want reading and writing and math to happen. And people have a really hard time when I have these conversations with them, because they're like, but what about reading and writing and math? I'm like, what about it? A, reading, writing, and math ain't happening right now anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And B, the way to really being learned, the way to really learning what it means to study is to study for your own well-being and the well-being of your community. Right? That's where the rigor is.
That's right.
And what you're promising them is a false rigor, right? And even psychometricians recognize that we don't measure true youth development and growth in schools. Grades, attendance, like all these things that schools are measuring, there's no psychometrician in the world that would say that is an accurate measurement of how much that young person really knows. But how much they love themselves, right? How they feel about themselves and their relationship to those around them and their relationship to the earth and the land and the sky and the water. Those are actually known, validated measures, whether you're talking to like indigenous medicine people or, people in the neurobiology lab at Stanford, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are known. And so the work that we're, really trying to carry forward and to advance is to now start having a conversation about, we know what it looks like in an individual classroom. We know what it looks like in a program. What we want to know now is, what does it take and what does it look like when an entire school commits to doing that? And so the book, Equality or Equity, was born out of that project and work that I was doing like long before we started the Youth Wellness Index project.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of the book is this culmination really of the last 15 years of thinking and reading and writing and meeting in community about these things as a way to try to bring together the things that are known. Because a lot of what I see, this is kind of cutting to the what is the advice I would give, folks on the ground. Look, I think that one of the strategic mistakes, and this goes back to, what I was saying about myself as a kid, like I was always looking at power and institutions like school
Mm-hmm.
and finding the weakness, like their mistakes that they think we're not watching. They think we're not really listening. And I think that the project of public education made, if its goal, which I believe it is not for the wellness of the children, right? But to maintain power.
Right.
And to norm that and to say, well, you had a chance and you fucked it up, but you had a chance. So you don't got nobody to blame but yourself. And of course, when you talk to young people that drop out of school or fail in school, that's who they blame.
Right.
Right. And you said earlier that the key to controlling anybody, any group, is getting them to hate themselves, getting them to doubt themselves, getting them to lose track of their own power. And so from my perspective, right, and I've written about this and I've said it very publicly, that I don't think schools are failing. I think schools are doing exactly what they're designed to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in my mother's 94-year-old wisdom, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. And we keep trying to fix schools. And the reason that it's having virtually no impact on the most vulnerable children, on the most wounded children, is because schools aren't broken.
Right.
They're functioning at an incredibly high level. And you know they're functioning at a high level because the outcomes are so fucking predictable.
Right.
Right. And systems that are out of balance don't produce predictable outcomes.
Yeah.
They're unpredictable. So what the book was really about was saying that needs to be stated, it needs to be documented, and we wanted people to understand that there is a ton of really good research and practice out there that can give you insights into, even given the toxicity of the school you're in, how you can disrupt. And the mistake, the error that I think that the public school discourse in this country made is that they said they want, like, you go to schools anywhere in the country and they're all saying the same two things, right? Well, they're saying we want to be about equity. Mm-hmm. And then they're saying that we want to be research-based and data-driven. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a strategic error.
Yes.
If the system aims to maintain itself, because the research and the data are both on the side of wellness. They're both on the side of equity. But the problem is that folks that are grinding it out every day, they don't generally have the time to go do the research,
right,
to develop their own data metrics. And so the goal of the Youth Wellness Index and the goal of the book was to say that that is part of our role in this community. We've been trained to be able to do this. And so let us put these tools into the hands of people to give them more ammunition so that they don't have to get into these false debates about whether or not this is rigor and whether or not this is going to lead to, you know, higher reading scores, because all of the research clearly reflects that this is the only way that you're going to increase engagement and achievement for vulnerable and wounded children. There is no other way. Hope Mifflin and Pearson and their latest, greatest, like, reading strategies, there is no evidence to suggest that those are the things that will actually get the results that you're saying you want. So my advice to folks on the ground is I'll give three very concrete things that I think teachers can and should do. One is to end the isolation. The oldest strategy of war is divide and conquer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's kept me so engaged and so excited about the work for so many years is that I've never done it alone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've always stayed in community, not just with young people and families, right, but with peers and colleagues that were grinding with the same vision for our young people.
Right.
And so I think that's really important, especially early in your career.
Right.
Because if you begin to develop a way of moving where it's you against the world, you ain't gonna make it.
Right. Right.
And one of the ways, a very concrete way to do that I like to offer to teachers is, what I used to do is at the end of every curricular unit that I was teaching, I would randomly select 5 to 7 kids from each class. And then I would buy them pizza. Mm. And we would sit in circle at lunch and break bread. And I would put on a video camera. This is back when we had like VHS tapes. And I would put a video camera on and I would ask them 3 questions. I would say, what did you like about the unit that we just did?
Mm-hmm.
And why? What did you not like about the unit we just did and why? And the third one was, if you could change anything about this class, like right now, today, magic wand, you could change anything. What would you change and why? And that was the best PD I ever got as a teacher.
Yeah.
Like their insights were so concrete and so like, damn. So I think one, right, stay connected to other educators intentionally, be intentional about it, right? Not randomly,
Right.
not once every 6 months, right? But make it a regular part of your routine as an educator or community educator. 2, have a system where you are consistently checking in with the people that you're serving about what's working, why it's working, what's not working, why it's not working, and their own aspirations and dreams for the space that you're co-creating. And then the third thing, piece of advice I would give is to dig where you stand. I think I spent a lot of energy, especially earlier in my career, pissed off and aggravated and directing a lot of energy towards institutional and kind of district level and even state and federal level initiatives and policies that I had no substantial control over. And I would spend a lot of my energy there. And what I realized as I got more wisdom and got around, teachers like you, was that that was the trick and the trap.
Right.
And if I could see it for what it was, then I would salvage all that energy to redirect to myself and the community, right, to actually control the things that we could control.
Right.
And, I've often used Tupac's metaphor of the rose that grows in concrete. And, I think of myself as a gardener, and these seeds are being offered to me. And, one of my homies, Wayne Yang at UC San Diego, who we taught for many years together in Oakland, he says there are no weeds. And so all of these seeds that were given are indigenous to this garden, right? Our classroom. And no quote unquote master gardener blames the seed for not growing, right? If the seed doesn't grow, we got the soil wrong, right? Yep. We didn't get enough water. We didn't get enough light to them.
Right.
And so, what I encourage folks that are trying to figure this out and grinding it out is to keep remembering where your garden is and dig there, because you dropping that shovel, you changing what's going on in the soil and in the air and in the light and in the water systems there, it matters. It's going to have a huge generational impact. And I think part of the trap that we get into is we lose track of just how much autonomy and control we really do have when we close that door. Because that's also a teaching for the children. If they see us, right, blaming and coming up with all these excuses about why we can't, that's pedagogy too. That's curriculum too. But if they see us saying, like, they can't stop us. They can't stop us. We're going to keep digging. They can throw rocks into the garden. It doesn't matter. We're going to dig them up, and then we'll just use those to create a beautiful sculpture. You can't stop us. And the more we model that, I really want teachers that hear this to understand that that may be the most important part of your pedagogy and curriculum, is the way that you choose to live your life, the way you choose to respond when they do push in and they do attack.
Right.
The babies are watching, and those are really important lessons for us to own.
Whoa. Well, the babies are watching, and I think that's so important for us to recognize. The challenges are out there. The naysayers are out there. The mess is still out there, and it's getting messier. But the children are watching, and they're watching us to see how we are going to tend that garden. What are we going to water? What are we going to till? What are we going to pull to the side? And what are we going to cultivate out of all of this, And, Jeff, I just want to acknowledge you for being one of the master cultivators and the gardeners that acknowledges the seeds and acknowledges the potential in this garden. And because the work that you have done, not only interpersonally and personally, but in the professional realm, has really opened up the minds and the spirits of so many. And you are now guiding, so many behind you. And you have been that warrior, that I know has had to battle, the status quo in order just to get the concept of wellness. What a ridiculous thing to have to battle for the wellness of our children and the wellness of our communities. But you have been at the forefront of that. And I just want to acknowledge you, man, and appreciate you and love you for, really being a messenger and a warrior for our children's wellness, And I want to, as we close out today, I really want to invite people to, as we look at this, to really do some reflections on your own wellness, on your own children, on those that you're guiding, and and maybe reconsider some of the energy that you put into what Western society says is important, and maybe kind of transform that into looking at the wellness. And as Jeff gave the example, maybe listen to see, ask the young people in our lives, what is working? What is not working? What do you need? They know, their spirits know. They got the ancestor spirits within them, and they know, But if you need more information and need, some more breaking down, check out Jeff's book. And, you can go to his website, check him out. A lot of information there, and I'm really excited, Jeff, for us to continue working. We have a lot to do on this path, but it's really about the children because they're watching. And let's hold up and lift up and advocate for the wellness of our children and all people as we go forward. Thank you all for listening, and many, many blessings to all of you. And let's really water the blessings and water the wellness and water the teachings that our ancestors gave us. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.